So I want to say thanks to all of you for inviting me here today to participate in a community discussion of violence no more. As a two-spirit sex work activist and leader in the equality of all sex workers, McRitch, the over 1,000 murdered and missing after women touches me deeply. The violence and the murders our community is enduring, and the thought that these lives are dismissed by our government, and we need to take a strong stance to protect our women and two-spirited women. So once again, I've been in the community for 25 years. Through circumstance, I started sex work at 18. Coming to the city, having no education, I had no job experience, and being two-spirited was a very difficult time for me. I did meet a lot of two-spirited Aboriginal women in Toronto. They kind of took me under my wing, and at that time there was really no resources for trans people, period, but also sex workers at the time for around services, place to go. So a lot of us, did survival sex to survive. Through the many years that I did work, a lot of my brothers and sisters, two-spirited brothers and sisters have died prematurely from most of the systemic abuse that they experienced as being two-spirited and being sex workers, which at a time around the AIDS epidemic, it just wasn't needed. I think these lives, they were 18, 19, 20, under 25, and they were dying. At that time, I felt the need that I had to step up and to educate, and it's been very empowering. I've worked for many different agencies in Toronto. I've worked the East Coast, the West Coast when I was young, just traveling and renting. I met a lot of sex workers, two-spirited and Aboriginal women through my past. I listened and learned around the violence they observed in their lives, not only with the police that policed us, but also within their own communities that led them to the work that they do. I think there's not enough community engagement when it comes to Aboriginal sex workers. I'm not saying all these women that were missing and murdered were sex workers, but there were that were. So we have to take that into acknowledgement, and how we as a community can bridge together to, oh my God, as we as a community can bridge together to empower our women, two-spirited people to work safely, to give them resources that they can, be a part of the community. When the OSWAP was started a couple of years ago, thanks to the Native Youth, sorry, thank you. It was well needed. We've seen a lot of agencies where a lot of access was a lot of sex workers were accessing, but there was this internalized oppression that a lot of sex workers were facing. And I think the community just, I'm not here to tell people it's wrong. I think we all come from different places and have our own objectives around sex work, and I totally respect that. But I think it's important that, as we sit here and remember all these missing and murdered women, we've got to also remember the living. The living is very much as important as the women that have passed on. And that was something that myself and many others felt the need to start this Aboriginal Women and Two-Spirited drop-in, which was very successful due to the stigma that a lot of sex workers face, leaving their homes and their communities. They've kind of lost a lot of their own cultures and things that kept them really empowered. And the OSWAP gave them that, it was like the rebirth that's coming together and practicing our culture and our heritage and talking and having elders come in and speak to us and telling us it is okay, and understanding why we're doing what we are doing. So those spots went on for a year. We bridged many gaps within some of the Aboriginal communities here in Toronto. And, you know, it was a place for them to listen and to understand and why community is very important for sex workers. So through that, so I want to just do a little bit about Maggie's. So Maggie's, like Crystal said, Maggie's has been the forefront of sex work movement for 25 years, bringing awareness about the mistreatment of sex workers and work conditions and the lives they choose to live. We believe that sex workers should work in dignity with safe working areas, and we are pushing and rallying for the decriminalization of the laws that affect us. Maggie's is currently working with Aboriginal agencies to bring more understanding of sex work, lives, and need to be more inclusive when it comes to services. As we all know, Aboriginal women and Two-Spirit women are the most targeted in Canada when it comes to all forms of violence and murder. Aboriginal sex workers are the most silenced within society and by their communities, which brings on more violence to our women. Aboriginal women have experienced multiple oppressions, including gender violence, racism, classism, and these are all still very relative in their lives presently. In the past 3 decades, more than over 1,000 Indigenous women have gone missing and been murdered. The government of Canada, as we all know, doesn't seem to care or put any efforts to address or push to eliminate the violence and discrimination Aboriginal women are facing. In solidarity with Native women's struggles, Maggie aims to raise awareness and help Aboriginal communities and society understand sex work, colonialism, and patriarchy, which impacts Native women. We also support Native women's sex work movement for liberation, self-determination for themselves and their communities. We need to acknowledge our privilege within our community and the differences in power structures within our community to push for awareness of violence within the sex work community and more government accountability for the mistreatment, violence, and systemic abuse our women experience. Okay. So as Maggie's has always been a very big part of the Aboriginal community. Like I said, they've been around for the longest running sex work agency in Toronto. They have Aboriginal people on their boards, staff, and they really work to bring more awareness, inclusion, and really accountability to community members around stepping up. You know, and you know, this is all of our issues, you know what I mean? This not only affects the sex work community, it affects every woman in our society. So, I wanted to read something which the Indigenous sex working community put together as statements. So, the Indigenous people for sex trade, our lives, our bodies, our choices. We as Indigenous people, we have current or former life experience in the sex trade, sex industries, and Manitoba territory. In talking circles run by the Aboriginal Sex Work Education Outreach Project, we came together to create a statement and Indigenous sex work. Okay. We acknowledge that Indigenous sex workers are the family of, we acknowledge that Indigenous sex workers, we are the family for a lot of different people. That love we give each other cannot be defined by the English language. Two-Spirit people in our community specifically give us the amount of love that can't be defined and understood by many communities. Many of us come from stories of foster care, residential schools, and never had families to call our own before. We are very much connected, and sex work has pulled us together to respect and connect over that piece. As part of the larger Indigenous community, we recognize that different groups make up and enrich our community: elders, Two-Spirit, trans people, youth, and adults. Indigenous sex workers are one of those groups that make up and enrich the community. The compliance of these groups are not limited, and Indigenous sex work often fits into several of these groups. As part of the work in acknowledging Indigenous sex work, remote rural Indigenous communities need to be better educated. It is important for our home communities to be just as educated as those in the city. Many of us are not able to go home to visit, stay because of the violent stigma and lack of acceptance of our profession. Not all aspects of sex work are negative. It is detrimental when the emphasis is put on drug use, and mental illness. While we recognize the changes that are happening in society, we also are certain to eliminate them. We're also certain that elements of culture are changing that do not support people in their choices in their approach of harm reduction. There are still large amounts of systemic oppression that Indigenous sex workers face in their day-to-day lives. People need to understand the history of Indigenous sex workers in order to move forward in the future. Much of the stigma for Indigenous sex worker is rooted around sex and history. The society's idea of sex work cannot often take this into account. Violence happens, but it's part of our society. Because sex work is looked at as a negative profession, it validates the violence. Our primary goal was to determine the health needs and primary barriers to health equity for Aboriginal women who are engaged in sex work, and to also raise Aboriginal communities and understanding and support of Aboriginal women who engage in sex work. So this needs assessment was to really see more about access, how sex workers are accessing within their communities. And we knew there was a lot of access in the sense of services, but there was also that internalized depression that sex workers face, that they could not talk about it, people didn't want to hear about it, or they kind of overlooked it. And it really was detrimental for a lot of Aboriginal sex workers to actually want to be a part of the community. As we sit here today, I only know a few Aboriginal sex workers here, I'm not saying any name, but why is that happening? Why are our brothers and sisters, our two-spirited people here within our communities embracing this forum? So there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done to bring more equality with all different communities within the Aboriginal community, bring more of inclusion and an acceptance, which is much needed. And I think without embracing the communities or consulting with sex Aboriginal women or two-spirited people around what they need, this violence will continue and continue and continue. So we need to stop ignoring the voices of Aboriginal sex workers and embracing them and putting aside, like I said, our personal objectives of sex work. And we all have our own reasons for that, and that's totally respectable. But as a community, we have to band together to stop the violence for every woman that is being violated. I know I'm on the short so I'm not going to go into the colonization. I think we all are very aware of that and how that kind of relates within the sex work and the oppression and the violence that sex workers face. Okay, I'm just going to skip through a lot of this. So, I think that if anyone wants to read this, it's here for you to read. I'm just so glad to be here to put a face to the many sex workers that are missing in murder, but also still living. I did a video which was just out of the blue at the Sister in Spirit event that I attend every year. And I really don't, when I hear remember the living, it brings tears to my eyes. Because, even though that murdered and missing women are very much important, but we're not acknowledging the women that are still living and what they need from us as a community. So I'm really grateful to be here. Check out Maggie's if you want to be involved. Talk to Krista, there's a many. But come check out Maggie's, see the great work that we're doing. Come be a part of the community if you want to get involved. I think it's important that we need to start working with the community to make changes. Thank you.